What is Indigenous pedagogy? What exactly is Indigenous pedagogy? This term refers to the teaching methods and practices that are deeply rooted in the knowledge and cultural values of Indigenous peoples. In Latin America, this approach is not just about sharing facts but about honoring the unique worldviews and experiences of Indigenous communities. It stands in contrast to mainstream educational models that often overlook these vital aspects. Indigenous pedagogy is closely tied to the social structures and histories of Indigenous groups. It reflects their languages, traditions, and ways of life. This method of education is about more than just passing on knowledge. It plays a key role in preserving Indigenous identities and promoting the well-being of communities. One of the main features of Indigenous pedagogy is its cultural relevance. Teaching often incorporates Indigenous languages, stories, and customs. This ensures that education is meaningful and connected to students' real-life experiences. Imagine learning math through traditional games or history through the stories of ancestors. This makes learning more engaging and relatable. Another important aspect is holistic learning. Indigenous pedagogy recognizes that education should address the spiritual, emotional, intellectual, and physical dimensions of life. All these elements are interconnected, so teaching should reflect that. It is not just about academic success but also about nurturing the whole person. Community involvement is also a cornerstone of Indigenous pedagogy. Elders, families, and community members often play active roles in the learning process. This collective responsibility fosters a sense of belonging and support for students. Learning becomes a shared journey rather than an individual task. Oral traditions and experiential learning are highly valued in this approach. Storytelling, observation, and hands-on activities are primary ways of learning. This contrasts with the heavy reliance on written texts in many Western educational systems. Learning through experience helps students connect with their culture and environment. In Latin America, Indigenous pedagogy has found its place in educational programs like intercultural bilingual education. This model aims to provide education in both Indigenous languages and Spanish or Portuguese. It promotes bilingualism and biculturalism, responding to Indigenous movements that demand recognition of their rights, including the right to culturally appropriate education. Historically, education for Indigenous peoples in Latin America often aimed at assimilation. It focused on replacing Indigenous languages and converting beliefs. However, since the late 20th century, there has been a shift toward recognizing the rights of Indigenous peoples to education that respects their culture. Many countries have started implementing programs that preserve Indigenous languages and knowledge. Practical applications of Indigenous pedagogy include training teachers from Indigenous communities who understand local languages and cultures. Curricula are developed to include Indigenous histories and environmental knowledge. Educational materials are created in Indigenous languages, making learning accessible. Participatory learning methods are encouraged, involving community elders and knowledge keepers. This approach supports Indigenous students' identities and self-esteem through affirming cultural education. From a Latin cultural perspective, Indigenous pedagogy is essential to the region's rich diversity. It represents a reclaiming of Indigenous voices and knowledge systems that were marginalized during colonization. Supporting Indigenous education right through this pedagogy contributes to social justice and cultural survival in Latin America.